Carolyn. Okay, so actually I'll just start off with just a bit of an intro about me before I share my slides. So hopefully you can see my face for 5 minutes. Although it's quite sunny today, so I've got my blind down, so hopefully I'm not in too much darkness. So my name's Lindsay. I'm a freelance graphic designer. I run my studio, Sister Minor Design, based in Wolverhampton, and I specialise in brand strategy and visual identity, print and digital design. I loved creating meaningful work for forward-thinking brands and organisations. So I've got over 10 years experience working both on agency side, but also freelance with clients, mainly from the cultural, community, education and arts sector. Those are the kind of sectors I really love to work with. And it's great to be here talking to you all today and really hopefully get across the importance of creating a strong brand identity, as I'm presuming that you'll all be needing to do that soon. I know you're all muted at the moment, but there are points during the class when I would love your input. So I'll let you know, and you can turn your audio or camera on if you wish, or if not, pop your response in the chat. Also, feel free to pop any questions in the chat. And then once we finish the session, I'm happy to answer them or chat through any particular ideas or thoughts you might have had from the presentation. Great, so let's get started. I'll share my slides. Hope everyone can see that okay. Okay, so what makes a good logo? So firstly, we're going to start with going sort of back to basics and thinking about what is a logo. So a logo is a mark that represents you and your brand. This could be a symbol, a shape, or it could be a word. So I've included some very well-known logos here on this slide. It's often the first thing someone will see when they encounter your business. So perhaps when they click on your social media profile, or right at the top of your website, on a piece of packaging, or even ambient media or out on the street. So something that you might not even necessarily be looking for, but see whilst you're walking down the road. And over time, this really simple graphic can become synonymous with your brand and the experience someone has had with a particular service, whether it be good or bad. But my main point for you guys today is that it's not just about a logo. So we rarely see a logo in isolation. A logo is just a small part of a brand identity design, and that's a range of elements that work together to form a perception about a brand. And I've picked a case study here, and this might be a brand that you might have seen very recently. It's a new brand come onto the market within the home decor sector. And they're actually a disruptor. So they're sort of going down the road of the beautiful classic paints that you might see from a brand such as Farrow and Ball, but it's packaged in a completely different way for a much more youthful audience. And this is a good example of where we can see the logo, LIC, which is a word mark in this instance, so just a typographic logo. But this also shows how that brand identity plays out in lots of other ways. So they've thought about packaging, so they've got their own shaped paint can, which is very different to any others that would be on the shelf. Here you can see the colour palette that they're using, the type of typeface and the type of tone of voice within the copy, so very short, snappy copy. They use illustration, pattern, and you can sort of see how from that logo, that whole identity sort of blossoms out across their packaging, digital, print. So when we're thinking about a brand identity, it's not just a logo. We're thinking about colour, typography, photography, tone of voice for your copy, illustration, and potentially iconography as well, if that's relevant to the brand. And all of that together will create a clear picture of who you are and what you stand for, and that's your brand. So before anything, we'll go sort of back to very sort of primal emotions and feelings. And we know that before anything, our brains see shape and colour, and it's this that can grab our attention and form a connection. So I thought it'd be really useful to start by looking at colour theory. And what I've done is a sort of a rainbow spectrum, the core kind of colours that you would find on a colour wheel, and just started to think about the kind of feeling that these colours can evoke. Obviously, it's very subjective. Colour is often a reaction to colour is often affected by cultural association, or it can also be affected by personal memories that you might have. You may have had a really cool red bike when you were growing up, and so that colour sticks in your mind as something positive. It can be affected by, you know, if you follow a particular religion, then certain colours might be important. But generally, these are the kind of emotions that come from seeing these colours. I'm sure you're quite aware that a lot of banks use blue because of that kind of feeling of security and trust and stability. And black's often used as a very powerful colour, very elegant, very sophisticated. So it's just to start to help you think about very core use of colour and that immediate reaction that you can get from a person, and how that would fit with your brand. So when a logo and a brand works well, it can help to differentiate you in a crowded marketplace and create instant recognition. So what I wanted to do now is just a really quick, simple task that just explores your instant connections with a few should be well-known brands. So this is a point where if you fancied shouting up just to unmute yourselves or get your chat open. So we'll start with the first one. Can anybody name this brand? I'm going to open my chat in case. Anybody? Can't see it. Yeah, so if we can just see purple, does that make anyone think of a particular brand? Yeah, I'm asking you to, that's right. Brilliant, Cadbury. Yeah, so this is an example of where I've taken the logo off. We're just looking at colour, and that instant recognition comes from how important that colour is to that brand. So are there any words that you would use to describe this brand identity? Classic, yeah. Delicious. Yeah, indulgent, brilliant. So yeah, those are the kinds of words I think that kind of luxurious, decadent, which comes from the colour purple. And Cadbury actually developed their own Pantone purple, C2685C, their own Pantone purple, and they've been using that for over 90 years. So for those of you who like Cadbury's chocolate, it's probably been ingrained in you since you grew up. And also, if we think about the logo itself, which is almost like a signature, which itself can, you know, give that kind of feeling of quality and trust. So the next, let me just go back to my slides. So again, I'm going to show you something where I've taken away a core part of the logo, and I'm just trying to test your instant recognition to a particular shape. Yep, quick off the mark. That one was a bit quicker, I think. Okay, so that's right, it's Amazon. Now this logo is quite clever in that obviously the part that I picked was a smile. You can take that out of the logo. It looks like it's an arrow, obviously, but it also has that kind of smiling feature. It's also quite, there's quite a lot of meaning within the logo itself, because the arrow is moving from A to Z, talking about the movement of a product from A to Z, or the sort of catalogue of lots of different products. Has anyone got any kind of strong feelings about this brand? That's interesting. Deliver well. Okay, that's quite interesting actually, because when I've done this session before, some people have quite negative connotations on Amazon. I think because of the potentially, you know, the values and their way of working has been quite in the media quite a lot this over the last sort of few years. So although it's got a very, you know, it's a very clever logo and has lots of meaning and is very recognisable, this is an example of where that logo could mean something quite different to someone and actually remind them of quite, you know, a company that they don't like, perhaps. Okay, next up, name the brand. So we're looking at shape again. Yeah, brill. So Adidas itself, when they started out, that was one of their design features was that they'd put 3 stripes on everything that rolled off their production line, and then those 3 stripes have become a very important part of every logo as it's evolved through the years for this particular brand. Does anyone have any thoughts on what the stripes represent? Or if not, I'll go. I suppose looking at these 3 in particular, it is almost like sort of especially maybe this one on the right hand side here, the kind of mountain. It's that, you know, that representing that challenge that athletes face, the sort of power of a champion powering through that finish line. So again, very simple, kind of very simple shape, but you can build a lot of meaning into that shape. And then finally, does anybody recognise this brand? Hooray! Yeah. Thanks, Carolyn. So this one is Penguin, another heritage brand. But this one is important in that it should be instantly recognisable. Maybe not so much with you guys, but it's been a brand and it's been about since 1935. So the colour orange and the sort of use of this typography layout on all the books makes them, you know, very recognisable. And it's a good example of how they've appropriated that brand across different types of merchandise, but how it's still always recognisable as that product. Okay, so hopefully that will have given you a good idea of how successful brands use colour, shape and fonts to build a really recognisable brand identity that should be able to work, like sort of you'll be able to recognise even if you don't see the logo. So next we're going to talk about you guys and where you would start when you're trying to think about your own brand. And before we even start thinking about what a logo will look like, we need to ask ourselves a series of questions which will delve deeper into the values of your brand. So questions, these are a really good set of questions to just start with, really. And you may have already have them, you know, the answers to them ready in your head, but I think it's good to think about it from a brand perspective. So why do you exist? What makes you different? What do you value the most as a business? And what's your vision for your company? What's your personality? Who is your customer? And why does your customer choose you? So, and these are the kinds of questions that a designer would also ask you when coming to you and working on a brief with you for your brand identity. And so from the answers to these questions, you can work up a really detailed brief. And from that detailed brief, you're going to get much more relevant design outcomes. And the job of a brand is to make sure your name and your logo stand for something. So these are the questions that can help you derive those values. So what I thought I'd do next is just a little exercise to show you how you can start to translate those values into the design world. So I'm going to show you sort of 2 very, very simplified examples of 2 brands with quite different brand values and how that can then affect the different kind of visual feel that might come out. So on the left, we've got brand X, which is bold, adventurous and innovative. And on the right, we've got brand Y, which is compassionate, dependable and timeless. And so from a design point of view, as we're looking at these kind of values, hopefully you can see the different kind of shapes that might evolve from thinking about how we visually represent those words. So on the left hand side, we've obviously got bold shapes, but in that they're quite thick, chunky shapes, quite angular lines, and lots of kind of forward and upward movement, which sort of points to that kind of forward thinking, adventurous feel. And sort of, especially with the shape right in the middle, sort of movement going out from the centre, that it's, you know, innovative and growing and creating new things. Whereas on the right hand side, we've got much softer shapes which fit with that kind of compassionate value, more rounded flowing lines, a thinner weight of line which just feels that a bit more sort of sophisticated and timeless. And then as we start to think about colour, again, this is where it can be quite subjective, but from my point of view, these are the kind of colours that come out to me. And you guys might think of colours that are completely different. But I guess it's just to show you how you start to build up a palette, really. So hopefully you can see on the left-hand side, the colours are much starker in tone than on the right-hand side. We've got really bright tomatoey red, bright turquoise, like a zingy lilac, and a warm sort of navy. And then on the right-hand side, we've got much warmer, like peaches and custardy yellow colour, cream and soft grey. And the sort of placement of those colours together as well can also help to develop that kind of different feel. And then finally, if we look at typography, again, keep linking it back to those core values. For brand X, we've got really sort of almost spiky letter shapes and very clean sans serif typefaces, very contemporary. Lettering that's in capitals as well, which can sort of make that bold statement. Perhaps italicized typefaces, which have that leaning forward movement. Whereas on the right hand side, to me, those kind of values point more towards the use of more traditional serif fonts, or perhaps rounded typefaces, so quite soft lettering, or even handwritten kind of typeface, which has a bit more personality and feels a bit more timeless in that kind of that signature style. So hopefully that just shows you that with the development of your brand, you should always link it back to those core values. Everything should be rooted in those words, because those are the words that make you unique, and that will deliver you a brand identity that will last a lot longer than if you perhaps chase trends or think, well, that font, everyone's using that font, so I want to look really, you know, of the moment. But that can sometimes tend to date quite easily. So I would recommend you always pulling everything you do back to your brand values. And then I just thought it'd be useful to show you my kind of process as a designer, really, in terms of where you start and how you go through the process. So once I've got a brief and worked with the client to talk about their brand values, and my first step would be to do lots of scamps and sketches, really starting to just play around with shape. I tend to, this is like sort of a few photographs of my sketchbook, I tend to have like a big A3 sketchbook and try and keep my brand values on the side so I can have them inside to keep coming back to. And it's always good to just draw stuff in pencil before you perhaps move on to computer, or even if you've got ideas that you work with a designer, you've got a few sketches, even if it's just, you know, I'm not an illustrator by any means, so it's just to play around with shape, and that it can even be quite useful to pass on to a designer that you might be working with. Mood boards are also a really good idea. These can help you to start to think about colour, photography style, texture. And this is like a mood board for like a fashion brand, but it's quite a nice way of picking out colours from photographs as well to develop that colour palette. And it might be photographs that aren't even relevant to your product or service, but it's just quite a nice way of visually putting things together. Could be on a wall, or it could even be on Pinterest as well. And then writing a brief. So unless you've obviously got knowledge of design software, for your next step to translate your thinking into a comprehensive brand identity and logo, I would always recommend working with a graphic designer, because a designer will have trained in design theory and software and can then bring your ideas to life. So they would create a number of concepts which you can then work with to create a logo that's really right for you. And all that work you've done up to this point, so thinking about your brand values, perhaps thinking about colour and starting to think about shape, that will create a really watertight brief, and the designer will have lots of resource to draw on to sort of try and really nail that identity for you. And then I thought what might be useful is just to show you a real life example of a brand that I've worked on recently, from sort of a very whistle stop tour from start to finish. But this is a brand that I did for housing association and charity called Staff's Housing in Stoke. So they're a leader in providing quality, affordable housing, and their main aim is to ensure that there is no barriers to anyone seeking to find a home, and to make that home somewhere they're really proud to call home as well. So I knew their values from talking to them, lots of meetings, were the keywords that came out with things like modern, straight talking, supportive, reliable, a local leader, and they're really keen on making sure that from this identity that the customer would be at the heart of their service, which would really come out more in sort of tone of voice and photography as well. So I would start by sketching, as we spoke about. They'd sort of given me a bit of design cue in that they wanted it to have some kind of house shape in it, but they didn't want it to look like the sort of typical house shape. They wanted bright colours, so I started working with colour palettes as well. A nice tip is, you'll see at the top here, this Pantone book is something that designers use a lot, but they are incredibly expensive. But you can buy these Pantone postcards in box sets, which are quite cheap and which are quite nice to just work with if you're working with colour quite often. So I would then start by starting to pull some of my sketches onto my artboard in Illustrator, and this is just a screenshot of some of those sort of early workings, starting to play with colour and shape and typography. And then I would work up 3 different options, so 3 concepts for the client to start looking at, and usually sort of 3 concepts is a good starting point so that we can start to feel which way is the best route. And then the client chose this route, which has that kind of house shape feel to it. And that shape is encompassing the typography as well. So it's really promoting that message that Staff's Housing is creating that happy home for that person living in that house. We had a few tweaks in terms of playing with the lettering shapes and the thickness of line, and perhaps trying different slightly chunkier typefaces. But then you will, so through that refinement stage, get it to a point where they're really happy with it, and that's when the logo is then signed off. And then, as we said at the start, so really thinking about it not just being a logo. So with every concept I would develop the look and feel as well. So in this scenario, we've got a lovely kind of almost Mondrian Art Deco grid pattern that works with the identity and sort of references that kind of architectural feel. It's quite flexible for them to bring in colour and imagery. And we also developed a set of icons, which you can see on the website graphic here, which work with the logo shape. and those are, you know, all part of building that visual language for the brand. So that's it. If any of you do want to have a play yourselves, I thought it'd be useful just to leave a few resources that might be handy. These websites are great. So colour palettes on coolers.co can help you sort of click through the spacebar and generate lots of different colour palettes, which might be useful. Fontsquirrel.com, that's lots of free, high quality typefaces. Skillshare, if any of you are starting to use design software and want to sort of learn more, that's really good for really good quality tutorials. And identitydesign.com is a really good site to bookmark for inspiration. That's where I got the lit case study from as well, and just lots of nice brand identity case studies, so you can start to get some kind of inspiration as well if that's useful. So that's it from me. I hope that was helpful. And if I don't know if anybody's got any questions or wants to chat through or wants to talk about kind of what stage they're at, and I'm happy to help if I can.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Lindsay. So Mia's got a question. Mia, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
I don't know if there's too much background noise because I'm sat in my garden. Is this okay?
No, we can hear you fine.
Okay, I've got roofers next door, so I'm just conscious of noise. But my question was, I'm finding it quite difficult how to like create a typography logo that's authentic, because you know, I find that you tend to get trends where everyone uses the same font, like that font that's on the Lick packaging. I see a lot of that across branding nowadays, very similar to like the Code Gaia typography, and just making a written logo that stands out, that's different.
Yeah, I think a lot of brands at the moment are going down that, especially fashion.
Yeah.
And kind of it's that very sort of slender serif typefaces that seem to be on everything. So completely get that. I guess it's obviously with typefaces you can go down the free route, which is obviously limited because lots of other people will be picking from that pool of typefaces. It might be a case of actually looking at buying a font that's perhaps not as widely used, so you can visit lots of different type foundries where you will obviously have to pay for a typeface, but perhaps that might give you a bit more exclusivity in that not many people will be using it. Or the other thing is working with the designer so that they can tweak the typeface and make it unique to you. Because they can then play with the letter shape a bit, or you know, you might have letters that perhaps could connect. You know, do you know what I mean? That might be a way of, if you've identified a typeface that you really like but you want to add your own touch to it, it's probably playing with the letter shapes a bit to make it really unique to
you. Thank you. Yeah, it's just difficult to find inspiration when everything looks the same, but I'm gonna have a look at some of those resources you just put on the last slide. So
I would I think actually Pinterest is great to a certain extent, but everything can start very similar. So perhaps having a look at some graphic design blogs would probably like really specific graphic design that might be very specific to industry, but I think they'll give you probably a wider cross section of case studies so that you might see different things. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Mia. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions for Lindsay? You're raring to get going and starting work on it, I guess. I think
it's quite hard, I suppose, until you get to that point where you're actually thinking about it. I can imagine it's quite hard. It's quite overwhelming, probably, sort of situation to start with.
Question there from Keith asking, is logo everything?
Well, definitely not. No, I think obviously your visual identity can only work so far in that, like with the Amazon thing, really. If people get a negative perception of your brand, then that will harm it much quicker than anything visual can do. And similarly, it's not just about the logo; it's everything else. So your copy, the way your photography works, how you print, how you look across print and digital. So
Can you see that, Lindsay?
yeah. Just seeing whether he's an advice now. So
Okay.
it's all got to work together. So the logo is just one part of that whole combination of colour and typography, tone of voice, use of imagery, use of icons. It's all hand in hand. So you could have a really great logo symbol, but then if everything else doesn't work together, it's not gonna really push you through and be noticeable by people. So yeah, it's not everything. The brand itself and all of those elements coming together is that sort of key thought. Yes. Yeah, Robert. I host Ladies One in Design, Birmingham Ladies One in Design. So yeah, if anybody wants to, any creative women or anyone who identifies as women wants to join us for our meetups, we've got one coming up soon as well.
How do you find out about that, Lindsay?
So let me just double check the URL. I'm sure it's just ladieswinedesign.com. So if you go to ladieswinedesign.com/Birmingham, in fact, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great. Is that all being held obviously virtually at the moment?
Yes. Yeah, we've been doing lots of events on Zoom. But yeah.
All sit there with your own wine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant. I think that's given everybody a lot of food for thought there. I certainly hadn't really considered some of those things that you mentioned there. So it's been really enlightening. And yeah, thanks again for sharing those thoughts with us. And if anybody had a burning question, maybe we could just hook you up with them once they get started.
Yeah, of course. By email, or I'm on Twitter and Instagram as well. So
great.
Yeah, I'm happy to help if anyone gets stuck with specific questions on things.
Yeah, but I think that the idea of asking yourself those questions, so sort of divining, coming out with your brand values or the values of your business is really key, isn't it? So make sure that your visual identity fits well
definitely
with your values.
It's easy to rush into trying to create a logo without doing that kind of prep work, but all that work will be so beneficial for you as a business anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
And everything. So yeah.
And it means then that you've got an authentic visual identity, haven't you? Because you've really thought about it rather than it being just a superficial logo.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Well, if that's all with the questions, then we'll finish up there.
Lovely.
Yeah. Thanks, Lindsay, for doing that for us. How are you busy at the moment? Again, it's picking up. Lots of digital marketing.